Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Chris Silver-Smith with us today. Chris is CEO of Argent Media, a search marketing agency, and has extensive experience in search engine optimization, social media management, PPC management, and reputation management. As a strategist, he's consulted for a range of clients, including Fortune 500 companies and public figures. Chris is also frequently an expert witness in legal cases involving major brands such as Google, GoDaddy, the Academy Awards, Starbucks, Adidas, and Versace. Chris, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Stephan. It's great to be here.
So first of all, I want to share a little bit of background that isn't part of your bio, that we've known each other for many years, since the 2000s, like 2000 and what, maybe 5 or something like that.
I believe that's about right. Yeah.
And you were heading up the SEO at superpages.com, which was a Verizon company.
That's right.
Superpages became a client of my SEO firm, and we got to know each other. We got to work together. I came on site to your location in the Dallas area, and we also became friends. And at some point, you gave me the heads up that you were going to be leaving Superpages, and I'm like, oh, really? Well, I've got an opportunity for you. I don't ever poach clients. I never poach clients, but if somebody's for sure out the door, and their hat's in their hand and they're heading out, I'm like, oh. And then you came in and worked at Net Concepts, and that was an amazing experience having you on the agency side, working side by side with you and doing some amazing stuff for different clients. So I just wanted to acknowledge you and your, our friendship, the expertise that you have, the huge history in this industry, and your desire to make a difference and help folks, help companies and people in the area of expertise that you're so good at, that you can, reveal light and do good in the world with that. So I just want to start the conversation with that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, working at your company was a great experience for me. I mean, to be exposed to the creativity, and I mean, it was a cool outfit, and the people there were all visionary, and I'm friends with many of them still today. It was fun. And you don't appreciate things in the moment as much as you should, and that's definitely the case with my time at Net Concepts. I didn't realize just, how fantastic it was until well later. I mean, I knew it was great. We were doing some really cool things. I mean, we did some, amazing SEO stuff for gigantic companies all over, brands that people still use today. And on top of that, the leadership there were all very, progressive and visionary and kind to people. And, that was a breath of fresh air for me. It really was, after coming out of, kind of a deep mega corporation that had been around for eons. It's quite a difference. And those were heady days back then too, because I think that, SMX was just taking off as a conference series, and we went and spoke at the SMX Advanced conference, the very first one. And I think that was like they were trying to make it edgy and attract people, and they made it kind of black hatty a little bit too. And that was just crazy. Everything that happened back then, it was so dramatic in the conference, arena, and SEO was just a new little thing, it seeed like.
Yeah, those were quite the days. And I remember speaking at SMX Advanced and causing quite a row with some of the Google engineers because I was talking about link building and how you can be quite clever with it, and not, it wasn't black hat. I didn't think I was being black hat, but boy, I ruffled some feathers. And I remember Miley Oye coming to me at some point at the conference saying, we were going to bring you on board to teach some content, like be our instructor on SEO for some videos and things. And yeah, that's not happening anymore.
And what was funny was I tried to tell them, they spoke to me about it too. I tried to tell them that you're not actually doing some of those things. You were just talking about, theories of things that could be effective. And it was kind of crossovers between social engineering and search marketing and stuff that I think it blew the minds of a lot of the Googlers themselves. And so I think they just didn't know how to react to it.
Yeah. Whatever, it's like if it were meant to be, it would have happened, and it wasn't meant to be, so it didn't happen. I didn't get to be a Google poster boy. My
That's
life is
hilarious.
still pretty darn rich.
Oh,
At
yes.
least
Oh,
I
yes.
didn't turn out. It didn't need that added to my resume. Anyway, so yeah, that was quite a wild ride. And then you started taking over some of my writing columns. How long did you write for Practical E-commerce?
I wrote a
Or was
little
it Search
bit.
Engine Land? Or I
I
forget.
wrote at Search Engine Land already.
Okay, yeah.
They had been it was your blog that you had invited me to write on before I left the company, and that blog actually is what changed my career probably more than anything else.
Which blog was that? The CNET one?
Natural search blog.
Oh, naturalsearchblog.com. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't maintain that anymore. I haven't written anything on there for I don't know, years.
It's an old dusty property, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
still
but
out there.
it had quite the thought leadership back in the day.
Well, I very egotistically point to it every so often to say, look, I predicted this. And no, I don't think anyone cares anyway, but
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. Well, you are very cutting edge and you're futuristic. And that's actually a term I learned that it's one of the 62 different traits in StrengthsFinder. And the reason I know that is because I tested with StrengthsFinder and found out that was one of my top 5 traits is futuristic. So, yeah, it does come in handy to see where things are heading.
well, I like to think that that was partly intentional. I way back in college, even though I was getting a degree in design, I was also training myself as a strategist, and so I tried to read everything on strategy. I read Machiavelli, Sun Tzu's Art of War. I read everything that the Harvard Business School recommended as strategy books. I think they even recommended Alice in Wonderland because people should be prepared for dealing with crazy stuff that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Rabbit holes.
Exactly. But it was, way back in college, one of my very best friends was interested in going into artificial intelligence. And he taught me some of the components of it. And one of the things that AI researchers back then were interested in was the game of Go. And it's an ancient Asian game of strategy that is many, many times orders of magnitude more complex than chess. And I learned Go. I'm not going to say that I'm a great player, but I've tried to play for years and years. There's still, kids in Japan that I'll, play with online and they'll beat me. Um, it's a fascinating game though, and some of the things that you really have to do in it are to look ahead about 30, 40, 50 steps to try to figure out where things are going and how you want to drive your strategy. And maybe that kind of applies today as well. Or maybe I was just very lucky because I went to work for, what was one of the oldest phone companies around. It was one of the pieces of Ma Bell way back in the day. They were, had entrenched thinking and they had been around for 100 years. And the HR person that had hired me had said, this is a really stable career path. We've been around. Our stock has been just going up for 100, 20 years. And it's just going to keep going because people will always need the yellow pages. And so I worked for the Yellow Pages division, the online Yellow Pages division. And so I was right at the spot where I could see, the disruption happening and the change happening, and could look a few steps down the line and see that that was not going to last very long. And sure enough, that 100-year-old business model is just pretty well demolished.
Yeah, it's funny to think like 20 years ago when we were using yellow pages or white pages, when we were using or relying on newspapers so much more than we do today. And yeah, what a different world we live in.
Very
Streaming,
true.
like the amount of content people are consuming online, video type content versus sitting in front of the TV consuming regular cable TV. Different world. Yeah.
Very true. Very, very true.
So where do you think things are heading in terms of the next few years with regards to AI? I know that ChatGPT is all in the news everywhere for everybody. Is SEO going to be completely changed, in your opinion, in the next little while because of this?
So, you get the sense that you're definitely at one of those tipping points that Malcolm Gladwell talks about. And
Mm.
I believe we are. I mean, even the founders of Google think so. I mean, they scrambled in a red alert to go try to deal with the strategic threat that ChatGPT poses to Google. I think we are in a moment of change, and it's at that moment when you're in the midst of a massive sea change that it's very hard to predict exactly where it's going to go. I mean, you can kind of see a very rough outline maybe, but the thing of it is there's a handful of different ways it could go, and SEO is in the midst of change with it. But the cool thing about SEO is that we're really well positioned to be in that change if we pay attention to it. What is people have for years and years predicted the demise of SEO, and I could argue that to some extent we have seen a lot of that happen, because years ago when I wrote on your blog, I talked about how usability or user experience was going to eventually eclipse SEO. And to a large degree, that has happened, to where you have to improve user experience and you have to improve the quality of content on your websites in order to be effective and relevant. And in addition to that, Google has introduced so many little elements of artificial intelligence and machine learning that even the Googlers themselves don't know in every instance what all the ranking factors are that have been used to rank a particular keyword, or the weighting, I should say. They don't know the exact weighting or what's most important or what combination of things is most important, because the ranking algorithms are now changed for every different topic and keyword. To a large degree, that makes it very hard to define one or two clever tricks to change rankings. And you can still fix some technical issues, and that's going to be around for a while. But the old style of SEO has changed considerably. And now with ChatGPT and Bard and any of the other up and rising AI models that are coming along, we're going to see a big change as they mulch together those AI and conversational elements and creative elements into search and with search. And SEOs are in the prime position to take the lead on some of that, because if you look at the new jobs that are coming out, then like a prompt engineer, I think, is one of the new and emerging types of positions. And who could do that better than someone that understands search very intimately and understands the importance of keywords and construction of queries? SEOs are in the prime position to be prompt engineers. But even beyond that, you're now going to be looking at how to optimize for those types of AI dynamics, And a long time ago, I intended to write an article on how you might optimize for AI, and that kind of involves things like psychology. One of the big areas of development for AI has been the language, because they figure that that is such a key piece of intelligence that if they could get get the machines around understanding speech and delivering it, then they've got a major building piece of real artificial intelligence. And they have accomplished an aspect of that, not all the way there, but they've accomplished a major aspect of it now. And that's going to mulch in with search to the point where it's going to go back to what Silverstein at Google predicted years ago, that the future of search was going to be search pets that could answer whatever your questions were and give you the answer that you're looking for at any given moment. And we essentially are right there in that moment.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book, The Diamond Age? The subtitle is A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer. I love the book. It's by Neil Stephenson. It's based on what life is going to be like when we hit molecular nanotechnology, where we can have tiny machines making more tiny machines at the molecular level. So they're self-replicating. And what the protagonist in the book had was a best friend that was an intelligent book, essentially, like an AI.
Exactly. Yes, I've read it. I read it multiple times. It was very impressive. Not only kind of some of the social, concepts that he had in the book, which I found fascinating, but particularly that AI book that was distributable to many, many kids. I mean, the protagonist, we have one of them is this young girl, but they also were distributing it by the end of the book to many hundreds or thousands of young Chinese girls to train them and give them a future. And it was just a fascinating concept. I mean, absolutely visionary. And to a large degree, we have that.
I loved that concept of you're in a movie as one of the actors, and it's like a choose your own adventure book that depends on what you do in your role in the movie, and then the actors on the other side are responding to that.
Right.
Pretty amazing.
It is intriguing. I think that we're actually there where a whole lot of the younger generation, and I try not to sound too old and crusty, but the the younger generation is learning from their devices and not from books. And I mean, there's positive and negative things about that. I've had all sorts of fantastic conversations with my teenage son, who's now in college, about many different topics that he's learned through his device. And that's a great thing, and it's been educational for lots and lots of people. The downside of it is also that there is a hubris involved with a lot of kids that they can watch a video and learn how to do something in 5 minutes. And that's not always the case. I mean, it works for some things, and I use it that way too. I want to find some new technique in the kitchen or try to figure out how to fix an appliance at home, then I can do that pretty quickly. But for some stuff, there's layers of complexity and experience that have to go into it too. But it's a major paradigm shift.
So, what do you think of Bing and Microsoft's deal with ChatGPT? And is there an important reason for our listener or viewer to sign up with the Bing AI and use that versus ChatGPT directly, or like kind of tease this apart for our listener?
So, I mean, it depends partly on your imagination, I think, or what your needs are. But I think it's entirely useful. I used Bing's interface for ChatGPT and quickly elicited, programming code that's usable and totally correct. And that's a thing that, novice programmers can't necessarily do on their own. But programmers, anyone that has done any amount of programming has run up against things that they don't know how to do or they're not sure about or new techniques, and they'll look those up online. And this speeds it up to a large degree. I mean, it can essentially write programming code. I've had friends that do very advanced computing and bioinformatics and such that have gone to it and requested a small subroutine to do, ABC, and it'll spit it out really fast. And then they check over it and they're like, I had to make a very slight tweak and it worked perfectly. And other people have reported this too, that, oh, I wanted to create a plugin for my WordPress blog and it did it. And maybe those aren't super, super sophisticated. And I think there's some limits in how much content it can spit out right now. But we're kind of right at the the first stage of this. So depending on what you do, it could be highly useful. I think, if you go, oh my gosh, I can't come up with something, give me a menu for my guests this Saturday evening, and I've got people that want these kinds of diet restrictions or like this kind of stuff, or I want this theme, it would spit you out a menu, or it could spit out a recipe that would work for whatever you want, whatever kind of limitation. Whereas it might take you, you might find a recipe to do what you're looking for, or you might find one you could adapt yourself, or you might find, something eventually after, minutes or an hour of searching that would give you what you want. But when it comes up with answers, it's coming up with stuff fairly good. And you can't always trust it. And you need to be careful and, educated in interpreting what you're being given. But it's really pretty
Right.
good. And people are talking about, oh, kids are using it to, cheat in school. It's writing their papers for them, et cetera. And I'm thinking about that because I write legal briefs. I write expert witness reports that are it takes me days. It can take days to do, depending on how many issues there are. And I have to do careful, diligent research and back up everything and cite it and everything. And I'm going, okay, am I going to try this? Am I going to try using AI to write an expert report? It might speed things up, actually. And then I go through and check every single fact, and maybe that's my component of it after that. And make sure that it's worded the way I would word things. And, but it's a very interesting tool in connection with humans. It's going to extend human ability.
Yeah. And do you think this was one of the reasons why EEAT was, that second, the additional E was added of experience? Because if if you ask an AI to write whether it's a legal brief or a treatise or some sort of manual on anything, basket weaving or fly fishing or whatever, it will say it with such confidence, apparently, as if it's the world expert
Oh yeah,
on it. There's no waffling there.
no,
It's just like, this is
it's
it.
very
This is the
convincing.
fact. And then there's no experience there. It's never fly fished in its
So
life. But
like this, I mean, the best example of this just happened and today, some couple months ago, weeks ago, I wrote an article on, the biggest mystery in Google, which is, does click-through rate affect rankings? And I carefully researched that. I had, my prejudices and what I've thought and what I've gathered from research for years, and, came to it, but I carefully researched everything Google had said on it for years. Different Google spokespersons, different papers they've written, different blog posts, different social media posts, put it all together in one giant whopping article. And I mean, there's some complexity with it. There are some spots where they use some click-through rate and things related to that, similar types of stuff in part of the criteria for rankings. There's some bits of it that's used here, but by and large, it's not necessarily used overall for big ranking determinations. So today, someone, I think it was Pedro Diaz on Twitter, had posted that he had asked ChatGPT whether Google uses, no, he asked Bard whether Google uses CTR, so Google's own AI experiment here, whether Google uses CTR, and it came up with a very convincing, very solid answer that yes, Google uses click-through rate for rankings. And it described it. It's very important. Oh, yes, people click through. This is a great signal, etc. And, that's so now Google's in the unfortunate position of they're going to have to debunk Google, essentially.
that's funny. So your position, based on all your research and testing, is that it's not a ranking factor, or if it is, it's very minor?
Oh, man. So it does have an effect on recency for things that, recent news, etc. There's an effect. It is acknowledged by Google that they use it in those instances. There's some other cases where I have seen it, influential. I mean, I think it can pop up in autocomplete pretty frequently. So there's some little edge cases and stuff where it is highly influential. I have seen some instances where I've worked on reputation stuff where it seemed like I'd isolated out all other factors, and click through rate was a more likely explanation for a negative items ranking in the search results. There could be some indirect effects that are caused by click throughs and things like that. I mean, dwell time is one of those things people talk about too, which I don't really think is currently not used. But there's some cases where it looks like it could be influential. And I wrote about that in the article that I wrote, but I remain open. I remain open to evidence, and I remain open to theories of how it's working. Since Google has said a few different things, different people at Google have said a few different things over time, there is some reason to, look at it with a little skepticism here and there.
Well, isn't it to the point where Google engineers don't even know what all the ranking factors are because so much is controlled by AI these days?
Well, that's exactly right. And I wrote about that a few years ago on an article at Search Engine Land called When Reputation Became a Ranking Factor. But it really wasn't about reputation as much. I mean, that's one component of it, but it was more about the machine learning models that were used. And I connected two dots together, essentially, one of their patents and another area of development. And it was very clear that they're using this, if not something like it, because it's a classic method for machine learning. I mean, it's just almost exactly a textbook description of machine learning converted into that patent for creating models for ranking based on types of pages and users' inputs as to how good those models are. So that could incorporate their quality raters inputs in ranking pages, and then they take those ranking values and put it into the model along with what types of page and what types of topic and content, and it creates it could create millions of different ranking models, which then any page that has a topic or relevancy on a particular keywords or subject matter could be applied. So it creates thousands of models, literally thousands of models that each have different weightings for the ranking factors and may incorporate different ranking factors too. Menus could be an aspect of restaurants' websites versus, and they definitely are, versus, an auto repair site or a hotel website or an article and information website. So these millions or thousands of models that are used, how can a Google engineer explain what's causing the rankings for a particular search result when they would have to know the inner workings of what is an abstracted model that's been applied to all of those different types of pages? It becomes incredibly crazy request to say that they can tell exactly why something ranks versus something else. So no, they literally don't know what's in those ranking models. There's thousands of them and they're abstracted.
So the only way to really know is to run tests.
Very true.
And A/B split test SEO experiments.
Very true. And then you still run into some issues depending on how you're doing your test, in that you have a whole giant landscape of changing variables that are time sensitive and also random, because you have potentially hundreds or dozens of other web pages ranking for the same thing, and they're all changing things on their sites. And Google is picking up or getting signals on those, or processing signals at different times on all of those diverse pieces of information, and then trying to isolate things that are very influential. I mean, by and large, if you do a big enough test with enough samples, you start to get some really interesting information. And it's still great that we know, a huge amount, most of the inputs. People aren't aware of some of the inputs in a lot of cases. It's kind of amusing in spots, like in the knowledge graph, how there's these very esoteric databases of classifications that are used as part of their knowledge graph modeling. And you don't realize that maybe you should go out and add yourself to all sorts of things like card catalogs or classifiers and, meta information websites in order to influence what shows up in the knowledge graph. So it's becoming quite a beast for a search engine optimization expert to try to get their head around. And it's very easy to, as you know, devolve into thinking that correlation equals causation.
Right, right. And there's so many details to keep track of. I mean, just in the example of Google, its knowledge graph. So you have to know that Google started its knowledge graph on Freebase. It used that as the starting point. And there's no way that you could add anything to Freebase. That thing is like locked up and frozen in time, basically. But that's a foundational component to the knowledge graph. You could go into Wikidata and add content there, and that would potentially get picked up by the knowledge graph, but it's not a for sure thing.
Right.
And you also have to deal with things like notability and conflict of interest and so forth. There are lots of rules around what you can add to Wikidata, just like you have to abide by the rules for Wikipedia when you're adding content there.
There's a lot of nuance. I had a client come to me a couple of years back who was I'll go ahead and say it's a numismatics author. He had written, he's a noted expert on the values of coins. And he came because his books disappeared from his knowledge graph, which just killed him. And he wanted to get those back. And I said, okay, I'll take a look at it. It's not usually the thing that I deal with, but I took a look at it. And I mean, there had been some changes in some of his author pages and which pages were his prime pages. I mean, that was a little bit of it, but it really helped to try to get things fixed better in his Wikipedia page, in Wikidata, but then in all these different library catalogs. There's a number of them throughout Europe, and there's quite a number of library system information catalogs that I coordinated together along with the Wikidata page, and that helped reestablish all of his books in his knowledge graph. And it made things even better there. We were even able to influence, what the description text is that shows up there. In order to do that, you referenced conflict of interest. My group has long maintained a number of accounts in Wikipedia in order to be able to influence Wikipedia. And so we go through and do a lot of community work in Wikipedia in order to maintain those accounts. And so we'll go through and fix misspellings, grammar mistakes, fact mistakes, add in citations, add in pictures across the board. And so I ended up helping optimize a number of figures in the numismatics world, which is its own little kingdom. That was an interesting little diversion for me for a little while.
That's fun. So you mentioned earlier how dwell time you don't believe is currently used in the algorithm, in the rankings algorithm for Google. So how do you know that? Have you done any kind of testing?
I have not tested that one, but I'm relying on third-party research and statements from Google on that one. Yeah, that's one that I have not taken the time to research. And for some of the types of clients that I'm typically dealing with, it's not a huge concern necessarily. I do have clients where I'll have a number of pages, thousands of pages on their website, and we'll talk about trying to make those pages useful and engaging and, try to make some improvements in that regard and then let the rest take care of itself.
Are you a proponent of content pruning? So removing from the site, or at least from getting indexed, old pages, obsolete pages, pages that are stub articles that you don't have, or the client doesn't have time to to fill
I
out.
really am. And the reason is, I mean, in part, I have not had to, some of our colleagues in the industry have worked on sites that have gone a long ways into very thin content optimization stuff. Let's do a question and answer on every single page. And I haven't had to work on a lot of sites like that. But I have done a lot of technical SEO on websites that are messy. And so they'll have a lot of duplicate content, et cetera. And just simply removing that is a major optimization that improves rankings across the board. And I have also seen in a number of discrete cases where you can have more complicated, robust article page that can answer questions and show up in the enhanced listings on Google, featured listings, for a few different queries just for one page. And so that tells me that it would be better to focus ranking values on a single page a little more than having thin content spread out amongst many, many pages. And I say that, and then, I had a potential client come to me in the last week who he wants some SEO work, and I did just a little due diligence and found lots and lots of microsites, many of which are actually ranking really well. And I hate seeing that because that goes kind of against what my advice would normally be. I think it's a niche industry site, and so it doesn't have as much competition. If it had more competition, those sites might not do very well. But in most cases, thinner content, not so great. It's better to focus all your efforts on more heavily on, fewer pieces of content.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I just was speaking to a friend this week who I haven't spoken to in quite a while, and he told me he bought a whole bunch of domains and in his topic space, like with lots of full of keywords in them, kind of like exact match domains, right? Three word phrases and that sort of thing. And he's gonna use this as an SEO strategy. And I told him I don't I think that's a very good idea. I don't think that's going to yield any value for you. And then he told me later in an email, oh, and I'm going to canonicalize all those to my main site. It's like you realize now that all of those microsites will not even get indexed then.
Yes, that's undoing the optimization that you think you're doing, I think, by telling Google that these are all related and really don't pay attention to these lesser websites.
Yeah. Oh, well, he's going to do what he's going to do.
Why does that strategy keep coming back over and over and over and over again?
I don't know. Anyways, here's a question I have about something that you usually don't think of as being optimizable, and I'd love to hear your take on this. Can the autocomplete suggestions be influenced?
Oh, so you were going to call me out on the carpet and have me publicly make a statement. Dang it. This is so funny. So I did write an article about autocomplete a few years back. And what I don't think I fully disclosed in it, which I will disclose openly on yours, is that I did do a little bit of, let's say, gray hat experimentation with autocomplete years and years ago. It was probably a decade plus. It was a decade plus ago. Back then, it was so much easier because they didn't have any safeguards in place. And so I had created a widget that people could add to their MySpace pages. That's how old this is. And if they added it to those pages, then it would do whatever they wanted on their home pages. It added a little functionality, but it also simultaneously had a little tiny iframe in it, maybe a 1-pixel iframe that conducted a search in Google. So I could direct thousands of searches with specific queries. And by doing that, increase the number of queries for particular, initial words. And so I was using an insurance company, which was not a client whatsoever. And I could introduce queries where their name would have the color red, white, blue added to the end of it. And so that was very easy to do back then. A number of people very ham-fistedly, much worse than that, influenced Google autocomplete and got attention for it. And as a result, Google added a number of safeguards in place for this so that it's much more difficult to do artificial influence of those types of things. I do know some people, I have worked with some people before on some reputation management campaigns where they used microtask workers spread out across, a region in order to conduct directed searches, and it can make a difference. The trouble is, if there's a dynamic at play that would cause whatever query you want to bury to be researched upon later, then you're going to have to do this type of strategy indefinitely, paying microtask workers in volumes to conduct searches for a long time until people forget to Google whatever it is you don't like them Googling. And so it is possible to influence it. There's some other strategies that are less black hat, and that would be I worked with a client who was fantastic at radio advertising, and so they would tell people, go and Google this and you'll find our website and do stuff. And so he was able to direct people through his radio advertising to go and conduct, structured queries, and that works beautifully. And I don't think that's precisely black hat. That might be a little gray, but he was doing it unintentionally, but it worked very nicely.
Mm-hmm.
One should be very careful when one works on a reputation management case. The Streisand effect really can come into play. So if you fight something hard enough, then it's going to make people curious about it. It may make headlines, and people will conduct more searches and maybe reinforce queries that you don't like.
Yeah. Can you define this Barbra Streisand effect for those listeners who aren't familiar with it?
Well, the Streisand effect is named after an event where I believe Barbra Streisand had a wedding or an event at her house, and then paparazzi helicopters came in and took lots of photos and things and posted aerial photos of her property online, and she felt it was an invasion of privacy. I believe she sued some people, and then people posted about her suing, and then that really got a lot of people interested, and so the images spread further, more headlines about it, drew lots more attention to it. And it would have all probably just faded away if nothing had been done. And so the Streisand effect is, by the act of trying to suppress something, you draw yet more attention to it and reinforce that and cause yet more, and oftentimes, reputation damage.
Yeah. Yeah. And prior to the lawsuit that Barbara filed, that image of her mansion had been downloaded only 6 times, and then afterwards it was downloaded 420,000 times. Just in the following month.
Yeah, I
month.
laugh because it's kind of a funny situation. I have sympathy for her, not wanting necessarily, that level of scrutiny, but it is definitely an interesting dynamic, and it's very hard to handle it. If you're working on something that has, headlines, I've worked on stuff that has CNN headlines for a number of years now, and you're extremely sensitive to it. And people that have, reputation issues going on, they often develop an extreme level of sensitivity. They're afraid to go outside if they've got a severe problem. They don't like to be seen on the street. They limits what they do a lot. And it can be a devastating thing to people. Some of us that are used to online marketing, we develop a little callous to some of it type of stuff if it was directed towards us. But for folks that are not accustomed to that, then I've had clients that have taken years to recover from things like that. I have one client that's particularly clever who has diligently removed every last crumb of things connecting him. He's almost got it all gone. He had me resurrect a website that was gone because of the potential for people to find it in the Internet Archive. I had to resurrect it as the company that operated it, and then persuade Internet Archive to remove it for copyright reasons, and removed every last bit of it. But that was actually pretty difficult to do.
That's like a, I don't know, like a script to a movie or something.
Some of these things that I've worked on would make really great Hollywood movies. I really wish I could tell the story on a lot of these things, but it would cause, the Streisand effect to happen to some degree, or more
Yeah.
scrutiny.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that
Yes.
particular case, he came back to me again, hired me again because he couldn't get his. They had an old company that had bad headlines, and then people were associated with it. He didn't do anything bad. It was the company that he was in did some bad things, and it made everybody associated with the company look bad. But he had nothing to do with any
Mhm.
of that. And he came to me and he was trying to get rid of some of their Instagram posts, but the company was no longer active. The website is gone. They had deleted different pieces of media, and there was no way they could. They tried over and over again to use the email and password to get into the Instagram account and couldn't. And I realized that the email was frozen within Meta's servers because the email had bounced at some point. And even though they kept sending password recovery requests, it was going nowhere. They weren't receiving them. And so I had to go in, reset up the password, and reinstitute a page for the company in Facebook in order to log in, get them to break the freezing of that email address within Meta servers, and then we were able to get the password recovery for the Instagram account and delete everything out of it. It was ridiculously arcane steps to go through, but they had tried everything to get it, and they couldn't log in even though they had the password in the email.
Wow. Has the CIA tried to recruit you?
Not so far. Not so far.
They might after this episode airs.
Well, I had one client who had lost their Twitter account some years back. I shouldn't tell this story properly, but they tried to they needed to recover their Twitter account. And back then, well, Twitter still will if you have the right things, but back then Twitter would tell you what the email address was associated with the account. And I could tell from context what the beginning part of the email address was. And I figured out by the number of letters that it was a Yandex account. And as it turned out, at least then when I did this, Yandex didn't have terribly good security with those email addresses. And so it had asked as a test question, what was your, favorite car model? Make and model. And there's not a lot of US combinations of makes and models for cars. And so I was able to just carefully do a very slight brute force, query into that email address until I could break the password. And so it's only ethical hacking, but we were able to hack the email address and get into their account and revigorate their Twitter account.
Oh, that's hilarious. Do we have a few minutes to regale our listener with some of your online reputation management success stories?
Well, we just did. But yeah, I could talk a little bit about that. I mean, online reputation management was really fascinating to me because it's more fulfilling. I really feel something for people that have problems and can't find any way to get help, and I feel
Mhm.
motivated to try to help folks, and it's much more
So, like,
fulfilling.
in what sort of situation? Because our listener may think, oh, well, these are people who have done bad things. Maybe they spent time in prison and, they got called out by the media, or they're on their rap sheet is online or something. Like, you do the crime, you do the time, but then, you've got repercussions afterwards too. That's just the nature of doing the crime. But you're talking about people who are victims of crimes that are being unfairly treated in the Google search results. So give us a few examples
Well,
of
I
that.
have like such a range. So I mean, up front, I'm not a paid gun. I don't take on everything. I just have a huge conflict of interest if I'm helping somebody whitewash themselves that's going to go on to hurt other people. So there's lots of stuff I decline generally. Mafia, icky, like pyramid level, multi level marketing schemes, cults. These are things that have actually come to me. Russian oligarch in one case, that would have paid really well. Kind of, that one would have paid really, really well. But I just could not. And, since the Ukraine war started, I'm so glad that I definitely didn't take that one on. But I've done well partly because I've avoided a lot. I've dodged a lot of bullets that way too. Actually gotten called up and threatened by some very icky people before too. So I try to keep a fairly low profile about where I'm located. But some of the like engaging cases are very pedestrian. So I like to tell people, if your kid is in college and they get arrested and the charges are dropped, or they have deferred adjudication where it's a minor thing, they've addressed what the court wanted and later the court drops the charges, they can still get vilified by the search results, because if they try to get a job later and they've not been convicted, they're not been found guilty by a jury of their peers or anything like that, they later on will have trouble getting a job. And for a lot of people, it's also dating, and it's having relationships in your neighborhood and stuff like that. People will not let you be the coach on the soccer team. They don't want their kids to play with your kids. All of these things happen. So all of that can be pretty devastating. So I have helped quite a lot of people with mugshots and arrest records. That's an area where Google has helped people too. People don't necessarily realize that those sites used to rank really well. Now it's hard to see those sites, except in a lot of edge cases. So I still work on edge cases. But I've worked on, there are a lot of victims of the NXIVM. They call it Nexium sex cult. You've seen some HBO specials about it, maybe, or Netflix, or Hulu. I forget where the documentaries are, but there were the principles involved that controlled and created that cult and harmed people. But then there are a whole lot of employees and people that had no knowledge of any of that going on and have been taken along on the ride. And some of those people have been falsely, vilified. And so I've helped a couple of victims of the NXIVM, the Nexium sex cult. And I've helped some Google engineers, actually, people that have been accused of things, or they've been outed in some way by icky organizations trying to make Google look bad. And they'll just, sacrifice an employee to do it. People, occasionally will make a foolish mistake, but, I've helped some people that have been accused of crimes that I don't believe they committed. And then there's like the son of a mafia, an old mafia don, went to prison and he converted to Christianity and he stopped doing what he did. But his son never did any of those things, helped lots and lots of homeless people. But when you Googled the father's name, the son's, information pages would come up in Google. It was a very odd, connection of keyword relevancy to pages that didn't have his father's name on them whatsoever. What else have I've worked on some dramatic cases too. I helped as an expert witness a human trafficking victim who was extorted by her abuser, brought into the United States under false pretenses and put into prostitution and stripping. And I helped get them justice in court, their day in court, and helped her win a $7 million judgment against her abuser. It was a very fulfilling day in court. It's probably the most fulfilling case I've worked on.
Wow.
I've helped a few people that have, really struggled with online reputation stuff. One case, Google, through a whole series of a newspaper website's listings in the search results, posted a very salacious headline about, a trans person attacking a teenager in a bathroom, and my client's picture appeared with it in the search results. And She's not trans. She doesn't have anything to do with it. Never attacked anyone. But because the newspaper website had created profile pages with every image that had been uploaded, she had run for school board in her county, and this newspaper website posted photos with, by default, and then they changed the UI to add headlines to every page on the website at the bottom. And so the headline for the sex crime appeared in conjunction with her image, and then Google took that and used it in the search results as the illustration for that listing. And it was very, very upsetting for her.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a funny thing to have happen, and it was partly because of the construction of that newspaper website and just the dynamics of the internet, and that sort of thing can happen a lot.
Yeah. And then you've had clients who were victims of revenge porn too.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've had a few revenge porn victims, and thankfully Google and Bing really became progressive and tried to, have said that they will remove any revenge porn images or videos for people without necessitating a court order. And that's been a real blessing to lots and lots of people. Yeah, I had one who, she was a salesperson in a big city, pharmaceutical sales. She made really good income up until this happened, when she went out with a guy and he tried to extort her into continuing a relationship, but she blew it off because she had never given him any pictures or videos. And lo and behold, he had, I think, hacked her laptop to take pictures of her when she wasn't aware. And he posted those online, and he also mailed them to her place of work and to her family. And it was devastating to her. It was very fortunate that the local district attorney in that city was able to investigate it and prove that he had posted all those things. And this was prior to Google taking action on porn revenge. The judgment against this guy, the criminal judgment, gave a list of URLs, and we were able to take the list then and petition Google to remove those. And then later, Google instituted their policy against porn revenge and removed the stuff. But this lady has changed her name, and she actually has me maintain pages under her old name in case the guy ever attacks her again online. So she changed her name in order to escape from some of that, changed her address and everything. It's really nasty.
Wow. It's crazy what happens out there, and it's really great that you're fighting for the victims and for the little person.
Well, I help out big companies too. One of my oldest clients I've had for 10 years. Never imagined I could maintain a client for that long. But they have pretty severe, client service issues on an ongoing basis that they have to deal with. And so I've helped them for years and years try to have a better online presence, and have reduced their credit card chargebacks, have reduced lawsuits by doing that. So they think that I'm well worth it. And I've taken on some people that have made mistakes that you don't have sympathy for. Not anything too icky, but like if somebody makes a mistake, they're drunk in an airport and they have to fight with their family. It's all on camera and they got arrested. I've helped them recover from that. Or, someone has done something a little icky, they made a mistake and they claim they won't do it again. I will take those on sometimes judiciously. And, I kind of say my fees are part of their punishment at that point. Mm-hmm. And it helps pay for, occasionally I can help someone that can't afford it. I can do something at a much cut rate or for free in a few cases. So that's
nice.
Sometimes the folks that have done something a little bit icky have paid for other people's recovery.
And then there's times where you've gone up against some really big guns, like as an expert witness, for example. There was a big Australian case that you're now able to talk about.
Oh, yes.
You want to share?
Yeah, I have gone up against Google twice for reputation management, reputation victims, essentially. I went up 7-8 years ago in Great Britain on behalf of a client who was suing Google to compel them to help him with his online reputation. And I couldn't imagine how that was going to go. I was very nervous about it because the Google employee who was my opposition expert kept coming back with reports that were not coming anywhere close to, opposing the report that I had given on it. They couldn't counter some of the things that I said because they don't want to reveal trade secrets. And they would have to, in some instances, to counter some of the things that I showed. They said, "Oh, we technically can't do this. We can't technically do that." And then I provide, I say, "Yes, you can. Programming wise, this is easy to do. We do it all the time. And by the way, here's a patent that shows that you can do this." So it's very hard to counter that kind of an argument. And so in Great Britain, I was all prepared, very nervous to go on the Queen's High Bench division and testify. And I stayed up late studying all the papers in the case, preparing to testify. Who knows what they might ask me the next day. And I got up early, dressed for court, ate some breakfast, and glanced at my email. And they said, the barristers for my client said, "Google has elected to settle this case as of midnight. Thank you for your service. You're welcome to come by our offices and we'll tell you what happened. And you're welcome to go with us to court, as we read the settlement agreement to the justice." And so I went to their offices and they were toasting with champagne and invited me to have some, and they were delighted. I figured out at that point that Google tries to avoid disclosing some stuff, and they try to avoid judgments that might set precedent. But in a recent case I took, that was very similar. A woman had sued Google a couple of times over the years for her online reputation because she had, under Australian law, I believe, if you had petitioned and represented that something was defamatory about you, then they had a duty to remove it, and they failed to remove things for her. And they failed a couple of times. And so she sued them, and she persuaded me to work on the case. I had some reservations because I like some things about Google. I like a lot of people at Google. And I think that the company has done a lot of good for us. I mean, we have a lot of information at our fingertips. But at the same time, I read her case and decided that there were some things that needed to be addressed. And I really feel that Google has a duty to help people with reputation issues online. I mean, They can afford to, they have staff to do it. And I don't see a reason, to resist that. And in this case in Australia, they did not settle it. And I think that I'm going to flat out say that I feel like that Google's counsel in Australia is perhaps unethical and injudicious and has not advised their client very well. Some of the issues in the case were identical to what I had addressed in Great Britain, but one of the key pieces of the case, they had two different Google engineers provide reports on their side, and they said something that was not, was demonstrably not true. They claimed, it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I'm not, but they said that she had not given the proper URLs. Google can be very pedantic about giving the precise URL that's necessary, that has the defamation on it for them to remove something. And that's a point of contention with me and them, because victims often don't have the technical ability to figure out exactly perfectly how to disclose URLs. So she had given them screen grabs of the search results when they had asked her what to remove. And those screen grabs had portions of URLs, as they used to show in the search results, and they still do, that are abbreviated because the longer URL might not be appearing. They were search results listings for Ripoff Report, which is a horrific website that has harmed a great many people's reputations. So she provided that to them, and they claimed that they were unable to find, and it was unreasonable for them to be expected to find the URLs to remove them. And they said, Google processes and contains and makes searchable trillions of URLs, and we can't find a URL out of trillions and trillions of URLs. It is just too difficult. And that just made my head explode, because it's the most powerful search engine on the face of the earth. And if they can't find a URL, who can? They find URLs all the time. That's what they do. That's what they're built to do. And they didn't have to look through trillions of URLs. I demonstrated for the court that you can do a simple site colon search for ripoff report and find far fewer URLs to look through. And amongst those, you can add in additional search parameters for in URL for the components or for her name, and it would give you the two URLs that they were supposed to remove. And that was one of the points in the case, and I demonstrated that for the court. I did it in my report, and then I did it in testimony during the court proceedings. They tried very hard to remove me from the case. They made an argument that I don't know how to do programming, and therefore I couldn't possibly know how to assess their information properly and neutrally for the court. So I established for the court that I do know how to do programming and that Google's attorneys could easily tell that I know how to do programming. They could not kick me off the case. It's fairly normal for, legal teams to try to remove experts from the case because it removes a headache real quickly.
Wow.
So, I mean, the outcome is my client won her case last month. It was finally decided that Google was indeed on the hook for being responsible for not removing the defamation about her.
And so did they make things right, or did they just pay her damages?
That part of it is still to be determined. The damages hearing for cases is often separate. And so that has yet to be done. And I don't want to really comment on that other than to say that I think that they will probably give her justice under the Australian court system at this point. I think that they have really eliminated their wiggle room and their ability to delay and delay and delay in this case. So I think that her justice is soon to come.
And you were part of that justice. That's awesome.
Thanks.
And that's a big part of your practice now, isn't it? To be an expert witness.
It is. It is a significant piece of my practice. I do agency work and reputation management, and I'm doing SEO for folks. But I do, lawsuits. I have gotten to where I kind of enjoy doing that some, working as an expert witness. And in many cases, I'm going up against or competing with a number of my colleagues, some of whom are my friends, who are on the opposite side of a case. And that can be, pretty interesting to kind of negotiate as well. That I have respect for people, and sometimes we don't have the same, opinions about things, or they just, the opposition needs, representation as well. And so to get a fair shake, maybe they need, that opposition witness too.
I know there's at least one big name person in the search engine world that you went up against, and you ran circles around him. I'm not going to mention his name.
I could say that there's a couple, but SEO is one of those arenas where you better be careful about bragging, because if you're at the top, there's only one direction you can go down, and that's down. You can only go. Rather not brag too much about.
Yeah, there's a beautiful Jewish wisdom quote that what remains hidden from the eye retains more blessings. So if you keep it on the DL, that you've run circles around somebody, or that you've had a huge win and won a massive case and got a piece of the action, or whatever the thing is, if you kind of keep that on the down low, it retains more blessings. And I totally believe that.
Well, I think that's very apropos for the search marketing industry too, because I think if I know which person you're referencing, they have a very big role where they're at. And they have, since we competed over that case, they have helped me and helped my clients in other ways when we've run into issues where they have been in a position to assist in some way. They have, done that. And I think that speaks super well of their character as well. But, that's the thing about SEO and the search marketing industry. People can get too competitive and hurt each other sometimes, but a lot of times we end up partnering in one way or another. And so I have trained at least one person who has now an expert witness. I've actually given some advice to a few different people that have become expert witnesses, and in one instance, I've given a lot of information and direction to, and they now counter me on some cases. And I've said, look, this is just business, and on top of that, we both get paid at the end of the day, so it's a win.
Yeah, awesome. And I've referred some folks to you who've contacted me for expert witness cases because I have zero interest in taking that on.
Well, I mean, it can get, kind of ugly sometimes if you get subpoenaed for documents right at Christmas, or there's been some of those depositions that I've had. I thought that I had gone through maybe the worst one when I got screamed at by some attorneys for Fox News. Of course, the screaming at, actually, I could take that any day because I'm winning at that point. They have it on video and they can't use any part of that testimony. It would, ruin their credibility with a jury or a judge. So I'm winning if they're screaming at me. But yeah, I've had some real kind of, they try to really tear you down in depositions. And depositions go for 8 hours, just about. 7.5 hours, they can have you, and you have to answer virtually everything, even if it can't be admitted in court. And so I've had people ask a lot of inappropriate things. I've had people bring up things that they shouldn't have had access to bring up even. And, while I don't have any big, giant, awful thing in my personal life or anything like that, it's still, it can be pretty devastating sometimes when people are trying to really just tear you down and intimidate you or get you to say what they want you to say. I couldn't have done it when I was younger. I guess I'm just too cantankerous now, so it works better.
Oh, that's funny. Well, the world needs people like you to stand up for what's right and fight for justice. So, I speak for, I'm sure, a lot of people and say thank you that you're willing to do that and take the lumps and the screaming and the probing into your personal life and all that sort of nonsense in order to do a proper job of representing those who need that help.
Well, thanks, Stephan.
Yeah. So I know we're at time, and we're well past time, actually. Thank you for taking all the extra time to chat about all this online reputation management and the expert witness stuff. This is fascinating. And I'm sure our listener who's got reputation management issues to deal with or needs an expert witness or some of the other things that we talked about would be interested in learning how to get in touch with you. So where do they find you?
Probably the best place to go would be my agency website, argentmedia.com, or just Google Chris Silversmith and you can find me that way. I have many, many options for contacting me.
Awesome. All right. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. And the different resources and things that we talked about, the different search engine land articles that you've written that you brought up in the course of conversation. We'll all put all that into the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Chris. It was so fun and intellectually stimulating to chat SEO and all that sort of good stuff with you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks, Stephan. Thanks for having me. It's been great chatting with you again.
All right. And listener, I hope you take some of what you've learned and you apply it and make the world a better place. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.